The 2020 Hyundai Venue, Canada's most affordable crossover. A starting price of about 17 grand is going to get you some good stuff like an 8-inch touchscreen, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and even heated front seats. But something tells me there aren't many of you out there that are going to be interested in one with a manual transmission and no cruise control. Instead, I think it's this trend trim that's going to do the trick, with lots of neat features to go along with a cool styling package that helps it stand out in a crowd. So what is this new Hyundai Venue all about? Well, in short, this is the new economy car. Not that I see automakers like Hyundai heading for the hills anytime soon, but I think one day in the not too distant future, when you walk into a car dealership looking for the cheapest new car you can buy, it's not going to be a small sedan or a hatchback, it's going to be a crossover like this. So what do you need to know about the Venue? Well, if you watched my comparison I did a few weeks ago between this thing and the Honda HR-V, and if you didn't, now's a great time to click the subscribe button below to catch all the latest content from autoTRADER.ca. But if you watch that video, you'll know you cannot get this thing with all-wheel drive. Should that matter to you? Well, no, probably not, especially because you're a smart and safe driver, so you use winter tires, right? If not, well, you definitely need to regardless of all-wheel drive, but this thing not having all-wheel drive is what keeps it so affordable. Now, like I said off the top, starting price is about 17 grand, which is very reasonable, but you don't get much for the money. Yes, there's that touchscreen, those smartphone connectivity features, and heated seats, but that's about it. There's not even cruise control in a base model. Now, if you add the continuously variable automatic transmission, you do get cruise control, but it's just the point that there's not a whole lot to the cheapest version of this thing. The Venue only tops out at about 25 grand, which is very reasonable, but I still think this trend version is where most shoppers are going to land. It's the only way you can get this cool styling package. Now, you lose things like the sunroof, but you add LED lighting up front and this awesome exterior and interior styling package that features contrasting colors. Now, I'm not so crazy about this green color on its own, but as an accent color, I think it looks really nice and it helps the Venue stand out. You get the colored roof, mirror caps, a couple other accents outside, and some stitching throughout the cabin and on the seats and on the vents and the HVAC controls. It's just a really nice splash of color that helps give this thing a little bit more character, and that's unique in the crossover space. The downside is that you don't get any of the advanced safety features you get in the model directly above it and the one below it. No automatic high beams, no lane keep assist, and no automatic emergency braking. Now, no version of the Venue comes with adaptive cruise control, and to be honest with you, that is a little bit of a bizarre choice for a vehicle that's new for 2020, but the rest of the stuff could be a problem for some of you out there. I don't miss that lane keep assist system at all because it's one of the worst I've ever used. That it's not offered on this model is a good thing. It really fights to keep you dead center in the lane, and it's almost dangerous in how it behaves. But the other stuff I do think is a bit of an issue not being in this version, especially with the pedestrian detection function that really comes in handy in the city. I think it's a shame it's not included in this version. Let's talk standard stuff for a minute. Now, off the top, I mentioned that touchscreen, those smartphone connectivity features, and the heated seats, but that's really all you're getting in this thing. No, it's not a Nissan Micra, so you do get power windows and locks and air conditioning, but there's not much to it aside from there. The good news is it gets much better from the second trim and up. There's stuff like a push-button start, a heated steering wheel, and a drive mode selector that gives you the choice of a sport mode or a snow mode, which helps make up for the lack of all-wheel drive by tailoring the traction control system to get you out of sticky situations in the wintertime. Now, this trend version adds things like 17-inch alloy wheels, but unlike the top model, you don't get four-wheel disc brakes, and there are drum brakes in the back. Not a problem, but it is something to point out. It all comes together very nicely, and the Venue is quickly becoming one of my favorite little crossovers on the market, especially with this styling package. It looks really great, and I dig the color on these seats, but they aren't the most comfortable out there. They're just really thin and really stiff, so on a longer drive you will notice them getting uncomfortable quite quickly. And I'm not so crazy about the bolstering. It's really nice lower down, but up top there's not a whole lot to keep you from flailing around in here. The other thing to point out is that there is a lot of road noise in here, and a big part of that comes down to the cheap materials inside. There's just a lot of thin plastic and not a whole lot of insulation or sound deadening, so a lot of wind and road noise makes its way inside, especially out on the highway. Another area of concern in this version is this touchscreen. Now, it's a great size and it's pretty responsive. Having Apple CarPlay is a huge bonus, as well as Android Auto, but it's not the best screen on the market. Now, the top version gets an HD screen, but the rest of them get a standard definition one that's just really low resolution. Everything looks really soft and almost out of focus. I'm not so crazy about this screen, but it does work pretty well, with one exception. The voice recognition in this thing hasn't worked all that great this week. The voice to text option, well, it doesn't listen at all, and it constantly says it can't hear what I'm saying, yet I can make phone calls and navigate to certain destinations using my voice. To tell it to go home or work, it'll work. So I'm not really sure what's going on, and Hyundai Canada's been trying to troubleshoot it, but it is worth noting, especially if you're going to shop for one of these things. When you're out on a test drive, it might be wise to plug your phone in and see how all of that stuff works. The other thing I miss about the top trim is the automatic climate control system. This one's just a lot harder to get the temperature just right, so it's hard to make the cabin nice and comfortable, especially when you've got passengers in the back. There are no vents on the back of the center console either, so keep that in mind if you've got little ones. Other than that, this cabin is a great place to be, especially up front. There's tons of room, outward visibility is great, and the layout of the controls is absolutely perfect. They're big and bright, you can read just about anything, and it doesn't take much time to get used to this thing. If you're using this to commute to work, well, it's not going to pose any problems, but anything more than that could be an issue. The back seat in this thing is really tiny, and as you can see with the driver's seat in my normal seating position, there's barely enough room for me to squeeze in here, and it's smaller than something like the Kia Soul, which has a similar overall shape and size, but it's behind the hatch where the real concern is. There's only about 355 liters back here, and it's a very narrow and upright space. It's perfectly fine for things like groceries, but anything more than that could pose a problem. Now, I'm not saying that you take the Venue off your shopping list, but before you commit to it, I'd recommend sliding across the showroom and checking out the Hyundai Accent hatchback, which has about 260 liters more space in the back. Now, talking about the cargo room in the Accent is a great transition to talking about what's under the hood, because it's the same in both of these vehicles. Engine output is pretty modest. There's only 121 horsepower and 113 pound-feet of torque, but it never feels like you're in a panic when you're accelerating off the line, and a big reason why are the simulated ratios in this transmission. It's just really nicely set up, so it's nice and punchy, nice and quick, and you do have that sport mode in the upper models when you need it. Even if you don't put it in sport mode, this engine has plenty of pull, and merging and passing on the highway won't be a problem, though you will notice some extra engine noise. This thing gets really buzzy at higher revs, and it needs to be higher in the rev range to keep it moving. Anything above 100 kilometers an hour is really noisy, and when you combine that with the amount of wind noise this thing generates, well, it's not the most quiet cabin I've ever experienced. The other nice thing about the Venue's powertrain is that it's pretty fuel efficient. Now, NRCan says it's good for a combined 7.5 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's exactly what I'm averaging this week. Pretty impressive, especially considering this tester has winter tires on it. Now, those winter tires do generate just a little bit more road noise, but that's part of my overall complaint with the lack of sound deadening you get in the Venue. But in terms of ride and handling, there's not a whole lot to complain about. Especially if you're using this to get from point A to point B, well, it's perfectly adequate. There are smoother crossovers out there and there are sportier ones, but this thing hits the mark, especially for the money. The suspension damping could be improved, and driving comfort isn't anything to write home about. So if you're looking for something a little bit more comfortable, you should check out the Hyundai Kona. But otherwise, this thing is perfectly fine, and I would definitely consider it if I were shopping for a crossover of this size. To recap, I like the Hyundai Venue standout styling, affordable pricing, and decent features across the board. I don't like the limited cargo room, the standard definition touchscreen, or the uncomfortable seats. There's lots to like about this new Hyundai Venue, least of all its price. It's not perfect, and the limited cargo area and uncomfortable seats are worth taking a closer look at if you've got one on your shopping list. But it looks pretty good and has some great features. That a trend model like this will only set you back about 25 grand before taxes is just icing on the cake.